be up against Paolo Cesari's blue-white-red Delver deck.
We jump in with Rudy up a game currently. I'm generally speaking a big fan of the of Esper Blade. In these matchups, though, the specifics matter quite a bit. The more sweepers that you have, you know, certainly a card like Supreme Verdict can do a lot to shift the matchup.
And Paolo was able to resolve a turn 1 Delver Secrets, flip it immediately, and then looks like resolve a turn 2 Stoneforge Mystic against Rudy being on the draw, only playing Umezawa's Jite.
And it appears that Rudy does have a True Name Nemesis in his hand. It's a really curious feature of these blue-white-red Delver decks that they don't really have great answers to opposing True Name Nemesis. Game 1, it's basically Force of Will or bust. In the post-board games, they generally have a couple Red Elemental Blast or Pyroblast. They can fight it over it on the stack, but it often can go just unchecked against many blue-white-red Delver draws.
And so if Rudy is able to resolve this True Name Nemesis, then even with Paulo's massive board presence, it might be a problem.
Yes.
And so Paolo responds to the True Name Nemesis with a Batter Skull. Going to try and just get in there as quickly as possible. There's the BBD token. An Insectile Aberration and a Batter Skull are going to be able to race somewhat effectively a Umezawa's Jite on a True Name Nemesis.
Additionally, there's a Grim Lavamancer in play that's threatening quite a bit of damage as well.
So Paolo's going to try and dig for some more answers here, as Rudy is probably going to try and use this Liliana the next turn to at least stem the tide a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, right now he's getting a lot of value out of keeping his True Name Nemesis back on defense. Ideally, he wants to have a spot where he has some of the rest of the board contained, and then can start going on the offensive with his True Name Nemesis and Umezawa's Jite.
So he's just protecting his life total right now with that True Name Nemesis, whereas if he were protecting both his life total and a Liliana, it'd be a much better board position to be in.
Right. The fact that Apollo has a Batter Skull in play with a Germ does a lot of work for him. It really prevents Rudy from being able to go on the offensive.
And so the Insectile Aberration is just going to be able to keep on pecking away for 3. Rudy's under a pretty stern clock here with the Grim Lavamancer plus the Insectile Aberration.
Yep.
So Paulo's Ponder has resolved. He plays a 4th land. Looks like he's got another Ponder in his hand in addition to a True Name Nemesis of his own. And there is the Ponder. Looks like he found a pair of Swords to Plowshares in addition to a Volcanic Island. So he has a Wear and Tear as well.
Yeah, Wear and Tear is a great draw here from Paolo. If Rudy plays this game at all, assuming that he's going to be able to put that Umezawa's Jite on the True Name Nemesis, then Wear Tear could be excellent.
And so Rudy is going to equip up the True Name Nemesis and swing in, and after attackers are declared, Wear Tear is going to take it down, but Spell Pierce is going to be able to, oh, this is countering a Stifle that was stifling a Umezawa's Jite.
Apollo's still with Wear Tear in his hand.
The Wear Tear costs 2, so he wanted to be as mana efficient as possible. He'll do it next turn, and the Grim Lavamancer, because of that, is going to be able to deal 2 damage to Rudy. And so Rudy does have the opportunity to gain some life or pick off a Grim Lavamancer or whatever he so chooses. He's going to decide to pick off the Insectile Aberration at end of turn, leaving the Grim Lavamancer in play.
Yeah, the biggest thing that Rudy needs to do is lock down the ground. If he can actually kill the Grim Lavamancer soon, then he has an opportunity to, you know, leave True Name back on defense, and it's hard for Paolo to attack.
Rudy only has that Liliana in his hand for spells. He's just got a bunch of lands after that, and the Wear Tear takes down the Umezawa's Jite. In comes 5 damage worth of attacking creatures, and Rudy falls to 3 life. Swords to Plowshares off the top is going to be a good one. That's going to be able to take care of the Grim Lavamancer, as well as Liliana of the Veil entering the battlefield this turn. Going to cause Paolo to have to edict one of his creatures.
Now this Lavamancer shot is effectively going to reduce Rudy to 1.
But he's going to pass the turn, and in response to the Grim Lavamancer trigger, with only the 1 mana up, he's going to cast Swords to Plowshares, targeting that Grim Lavamancer. So Rudy is going to go to 1 here. Paolo going to go up to 20. But the board is sort of in Rudy's favor a little bit.
It's tentatively stabilized. I believe Paolo has a True Name Nemesis in his hand that's going to be very hard for Rudy to answer in time.
Yes.
But
and so True Name Nemesis going to come down here from Paolo. That is going to name Rudy Briksza, and Rudy has the turn back, has a draw off of this brainstorm to try and find an answer.
And these Esper Deathblade builds often have pretty fuzzy mana. You're seeing it in action right now as Rudy has both Tropical Island and Scrubland in play, cannot find an answer,
Yep.
and we're on to game 3.
Found an O-ring, which was a little bit too late to be able to deal with the Batter Skull or anything else on the battlefield, and we're going to move to game 3. Looking at both these players' sideboards, Paolo has the 1 copy of Wear and Tear that we saw already. He has additional copies of Red Elemental Blast, 3 of them. 2 Grim Lavamancers. He's got another True Name Nemesis and a Swords to Plowshares. Could possibly also bring in the Sword of Feast and Famine to try and play the card advantage game.
Yeah, I like the more aggressive equipment. I'm not sure what his options are in the first game here. It's a Jitte and a Batter Skull. Not unreasonable for him to bring in the sword as well. I really like the additional creatures. There might be too many overlapping pieces in the deck to bring in a card like Meddling Mage, but Grim Lavamancer is really valuable. You know, Rudy has creatures that can potentially be targeted by it, and he really needs to overload Rudy's removal. That's a key part of his game plan here. He needs to get something to stick, so Lavamancer can do a lot of work. It's also a creature that has value if Rudy has True Name Nemesis in play. It's something that can continue to shoot either Rudy or creatures he controls if True Name Nemesis is locking up the ground.
Rudy has a couple interesting options in his sideboard. We saw the Oblivion Ring to be able to take care of potential equipment, as well as he also has a copy of Manriki Gusari, which he can get with his Stoneforge Mystics. He also has Zealous Persecution to be able to answer opposing True Name Nemesis.
Yeah, the Manriki Gusari is a card that's been picking up in popularity in recent months as the Stoneforge mirrors have become more and more prevalent between both Esper Blade and Blue-White Red Delver builds.
He also has a pair of Abrupt Decay, which I wouldn't be too surprised to see. He's also got a Notion Thief. Now, I've heard some discussion of bringing in Notion Thief just as another body that can sometimes snag a Brainstorm on the stack. What do you think about doing that?
It's high risk, high upside. It feels a lot worse to me in a matchup where, you know, your opponent has to bring in Red Elemental Blast to name your to answer your True Name Nemesis. But there actually aren't that many Red Blast targets. It's likely that they will be sitting in Paolo's hand unless Rudy's trying to get a True Name Nemesis in play. So bringing in a really juicy, expensive Red Elemental Blast target is not something I'm a huge fan of.
Sure. I mean, there are lots of ways to deal with Notion Thief in this matchup, not the least of which is a Umezawa's Jitte counter.
Yeah, you're not playing it for the body.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you are just because you feel you need to overload removal or what have you, but it's more about trying to catch someone who's brainstorming. And the upside is huge. I mean, if it happens, that's likely game over. But I think it's very difficult to engineer against a deck that's playing with a bunch of Red Blasts, a bunch of Wastelands. Again, Rudy's Esper Deathblade deck really, I mean, basically no basic lands in this list. So Wasteland he's very susceptible to. It feels gritty to me, but
yeah,
we shall see.
I didn't say that it was a good idea. I'd heard discussion from some folks in the room as it's probably not best against the Blue-White Red Delver deck, as they also have access to Swords to Plowshares. Probably much better option against things like Rug Delver.
Sure.
They have more threats involved.
But I am a big fan of high risk, high upside.
Sure.
So I don't know what I would do in those. I don't know what I would do in Rudy's shoes here, but I believe, you know, I would probably leave it in the sideboard.
He's probably got enough things that he wants to bring in that he doesn't need to bring in the Notion Thief. He has enough stuff that he wants to take out that he'll be able to find enough stuff to bring in, like the Manriki Gusari, the Zealous Persecution, the Oblivion Ring, possibly even the Venser.
Yeah, and his and Rudy's game 1 build is actually pretty good against Blue-White Red Delver, so there's not a lot of fat for him to trim out. He probably doesn't want to have a bunch of Force of Wills or Thought Seizes, so there's, you know, a couple cuts there, but his deck is basically good creatures and removal spells and some planeswalkers. Historically, not a bad recipe against Blue-White Red Delver.
Now, Paolo's build has the 4 Stifles in the Blue-White Red Delver deck, which I don't think I've seen a lot of the Stifles in recent builds of Blue-White Red.
You see Paolo take a mulligan here? Yeah, I mean, Owen's win in DC really set the standard. We see a lot of decks on camera that are basically just copies of Owen's 75 or are within 1 or 2 cards of Owen's 75. I'm not a huge fan of Stifle in this deck. I feel like the deck just kind of taps out too often, has more expensive threats, is playing 3 mana spells and, you know, Stoneforge Mystics, and I'm not a huge fan of Stifle in the tempo decks regardless, because I feel, you know, unless you're playing it for specific metagame reasons you feel that there's going to be a lot of Storm, or you're really fighting over Stoneforge Mystic, or that sort of thing. I think a lot of people just put it in the decks trying to fight over fetch lands. I don't think the card provides enough if that's the only thing that's going on. But if you have specific metagame reasons that you want Stifle on top of the fetch lands, then it's a reasonable include.
And Rudy did keep his hand. He showed it to us. I didn't get a great look at it, but it did look like it included a Thoughtseize and a Liliana. So both of those cards very good against mulligans in particular. So we'll see how Paolo's 6 looks. Both of these decks, by the way, lands and spells in the same deck.
Yeah.
And creatures.
Permanence, mana is involved. It's a really radical departure from the Dredge deck we just had on camera.
You're not just trying to flip your deck face up.
Right.
And so it looks like Paolo has decided to keep his 6, and Rudy leads off with Ponder, keeps it, and finds a land on top. A hand full of goodies.
Yeah, it looks like it was a Tropical Island Ponder hand that Rudy kept. Pretty greedy, as he has Thoughtseize and Plow and double black spells in this deck, but he is rewarded thus far with at least finding a second land.
And not getting wastelanded on turn 1, as Paolo plays a Ponder of his own off of Volcanic Island. Sees Wasteland, Swords to Plowshares, Force of Will. Looks pretty happy with that mixture there, and he is going to keep, oh no, he's not. He's actually going to shuffle that one away. He might need a second colored source as well. I don't know, if I saw Force of Will, Swords to Plowshares, Wasteland against an Esper Deathblade deck, I'd be pretty happy with that, but I don't particularly know the contents of Paolo's hand right now, as he's going to replace one of his sleeves real quickly.
Perhaps.
Rudy making sure that we don't accidentally pick that one up and put it back in a deck somewhere.
Perhaps missing mana, but we will find out momentarily.
Yep. As that is the card, it looks like it was on top of the deck.
Rudy's mana is stretched pretty thin. I mean, I guess you have to keep a lot of hands that look like the ones that Rudy kept here. But
yep, a little bit suspect with the Tropical Island basically only being an island unless there's a Deathrite Shaman in play. An island that can be destroyed by Wasteland, by the way. And so, but he found the Flooded Strand to be able to go get the Scrub Land to be able to play whatever spell he wants on turn 2. As we see, Paolo's hand is a little bit strained on mana. He's got Wear Tear, Lightning Bolt, Red Elemental Blast.
I remember very distinctly Gerard Fabiano playing a match where he had Bant mana in play and was getting crushed and couldn't cast the spells in his hand. I was watching the coverage, and I went up from my computer to the kitchen to get a cup of coffee. And again, Gerard would just Tropical Island Tundra and stuff in play. And I hear one of the commentators go, "And Liliana of the Veil," the draw for Fabiano. And
yeah.
Nearly spat my coffee up.
Yeah, that's the danger of playing lands and spells, especially when your mana is as strained as this is sometimes it's not the right lands with the right spells.
Right. But he does have all 4 colors in play now.
Yep. And he's going to use one of them to cast a Thoughtseize, targeting Paolo, presumably going to use the other one to follow up with the Deathrite Shaman that he has in hand.
Yeah, Rudy finding a second land and a Deathrite Shaman off that Ponder. Really, really excellent for him right now.
So we see Tundra, Arid Mesa, Wear Tear, Red Elemental Blast, Lightning Bolt, and Force of Will. Looks like Force of Will was the draw off the Ponder.
And this is a great hand for Rudy to see. The hand's purely reactive. He can actually stick Deathrite Shaman by taking Lightning Bolt and just try to run him out of the gym with Liliana is a really good path here.
Looks like that's the path that we are currently following, as Lightning Bolt is the choice and Deathrite Shaman hits the board. So Paolo's going to get to untap. He does have 4 copies of Swords and 3 additional Lightning Bolts in addition to the Grim Lawmancers that are good trumps over the Deathrite Shaman.
But if he doesn't do something really big this turn, the combination of Plow, Snapcaster, Liliana, Rudy's hand is stacked.
Yep. So Ponder off of the Tundra is what we're going to do first. It looks like Paolo did find a Lightning Bolt in addition to Batterskull as the 3rd card in the pile there. And Grim Lavamancer, I believe, also. If he does have an answer to the Deathrite Shaman, this is almost certainly a keep. But do you think that if there's no answer here, that Paolo has to shuffle this away?
I mean, Rudy does have a lot of threatening plays to make off this Deathrite Shaman. He could cast Liliana of the Veil. Another land would allow him to cast Jace the Mind Sculptor, though Paolo does have a Red Blast at the ready for that. So he kind of has to let it roll if the top 3 were any good, but he may not have an answer for this Liliana.
It looks like Stoneforge Mystic is going to be the play first, and Paolo does have an answer to that, although Rudy knows about the answer to that, which is the wear tear.
It's possible that Rudy feels his hand is so good that he's not really interested in going ahead and plussing Liliana right now.
Rudy decides to go get the Batter Skull. That was the Grand Prix foil art. You might not be as familiar with that one as the classic new Phyrexia art, as a Wasteland is going to take care of the Scrubland on Rudy's side of the board. Rudy still in a little bit of mana issues.
Yeah, it's still tight, and if something happens to this Deathrite Shaman, it could get really ugly.
We'll see if Paolo has a way to deal with it. Looks like he only has the Grim Lavamancer right now, and Rudy is able to Swords to Plowshares that right away. So the Lavamancer becomes a farmer, and Rudy's able to untap with a pair of 1/2s. The Stoneforge Mystic enters the red zone rather than activate to try to sneak the Batterskull into play.
Yeah, Rudy is still conscious of the wear tear in Paolo's hand, so he's going to force Paolo to do other things. Maybe Rudy wants to step Liliana and just start plussing it to wear just basically wear Paolo out of resources.
And so he's going to just peck away for 1. Rudy top decked a Tundra. That isn't going to allow him to play a Liliana, of which he now has 2. It is going to help play a Snapcaster Mage if he wants to flashback either Thoughtseize or a Ponder, or a Swords to Plowshares for that matter. Deathrite Shaman and Snapcaster Mage fighting alongside, just like they drew it up in R&D.
Yeah.
And so Swords to Plowshares takes out the Stoneforge Mystic. And Rudy is content to just sit behind his wall of cards in his hand with the Deathrite Shaman on the board, try and protect that for a little bit. He finds a True Name Nemesis now, but he's not going to, doesn't look like he was planning on casting it. Instead, he's going to cast Snapcaster Mage.
He's trying to run Paolo out of Red Blast here. He will likely just target the Ponder and try to draw some cards, find another land. This is also a really enticing target for Paolo to just Red Blast, so it may pave the way for Rudy to be able to get a True Name Nemesis into play.
But it looks like it's going to resolve. And the Ponder reveals Brainstorm, land. Those are some things that Rudy would be interested in, and he is going to keep them on top. Finds a Polluted Delta and passes.
Yeah, the bottleneck that Rudy has right now is definitely mana. It's no absence of power in his hand.
And he found 2 lands on top, so he's going to be able to take advantage of all of that. One of them being a Wasteland, although Paolo seems to be a bit flush with mana at the moment.
Yeah, Rudy may just want to use this for mana himself for a little bit.
Yep, the colorless man is certainly going to help cast Liliana of the Veil or Batterskull later on down the line. Snapcaster Mage gets in 2 damage, the Tiago Chan Invitational card, showing off that it has 2 power, not just the 1, as the 1/2s that Rudy has in his deck, like Deathrite Shaman and Stoneforge Mystic, so hits twice as hard. Rudy's going to go get his 4th land.
And if he's drawn enough low power cards or cards he's not really interested in casting, this might be the turn that we see Liliana deployed.
And so 1, 2, 3 mana. There's Liliana of the Veil. Looks like Paolo may try to just hard cast counterspell this for 5 with the Force of Will. So Paolo's going to take 3 from his own fetch lands, falling to 14. And this Force of Will is going to cost 5 mana rather than the typical blue card in 1 life.
But Rudy's, again, pretty happy to make this trade. He has a leftover Liliana in his hand and just trying to run Paolo out.
Yep. He's got plenty of spells left in his hand. And oh, by the way, he's also got a clock in play. It's not a fast clock. It's a 7-turn clock, but it's good enough for now to just lean on the pressure.
It's another angle of attack. Doesn't mean anything this moment, but all the damage adds up.
Paolo found Batterskull on top of his deck, something he is able to cast should he so choose, and he does so choose. And the trigger is going to bring a Brian Bronduin token in, but before it's even able to get on camera, Swords to Plowshares takes care of it. And so Rudy is pretty much back where he was before. And he has a Liliana of his own again, but first is going to be True Name Nemesis, which resolves, and Blue White Red Delver, as you mentioned earlier, doesn't have any way really to deal with a resolved True Name Nemesis.
Yeah, and that's why Rudy was so quick to pick his spot there to finally get that True Name Nemesis into play. Unless Paolo is playing something unconventional on his list, this is just going to be a thing that's in play for the rest of the game.
Yep, and Liliana of the Veil also able to come in, as he has 5 lands plus Death Red Shaman, so 2 extremely powerful 3-drops enter the battlefield. Rudy's probably going to just, he's just going to let it pass. Decided not to +1 it.
Yeah, Rudy's got 2 removal spells up to his hand. He knows Paolo has a lot of situational cards that he can discard right now. He basically wants to have an Edict in play to fight over a True Name Nemesis or a Batterskull reset.
Yep, doesn't want to get it countered, doesn't have any pressure to really do anything with it, as Rudy top decks another True Name Nemesis in addition to the Batterskull and the Abrupt Decay that he has in hand. And so Red Elemental Blast points jestingly at the True Name Nemesis before it takes out the 2/1. Wasteland taking down the other red source of Paolo's.
And this is opening up another window here for Rudy to potentially resolve True Name Nemesis after combat.
Yep. Destroying the other red source, and now another True Name Nemesis. That also is going to name Paolo Cesari. And now Paolo is really behind the 8 ball here. Finds another red spell on top of his deck with only the 1 red land. And he's going to use Lightning Bolt to take care of Liliana of the Veil if he happens to be able to find a True Name Nemesis plus a land to be able to equip the Batterskull.
Yeah, but he does not have that much time. I mean, we're looking at not this turn, but the next turn where Rudy has him dead.
Yep. And Rudy puts Paolo to 5 after attacking for 6, so even the running string of spells that I just mentioned aren't going to do it for him. Paolo finds a Lightning Bolt, and that will be the match. So Rudy Briksza is going to move to 7-1 in good position, possibly able to draw into the top 8 of this Legacy Open here in Baltimore. Paolo Cesari falls to 6-2, most likely not going to be able to make the knockout rounds.
And